Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the book.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking. I'm your host, SHERI HASAN of Karmic Evolution Astrology, and I'm coming to you on May 24th, 2024 from karmicevolution.com or any of your favorite podcast stations. Before we get into this week's astro news you can use, my usual quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution, and that a new show drops every Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific and 2 p.m. Eastern on most major podcast platforms. So make sure you tune in anytime during the week. And I'm still offering my 75-minute Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for only $125, which is a discounted rate for podcast listeners only. So if you'd like to learn the true meaning of your individual birth chart in order to gain greater consciousness about your soul's true mission and purpose, and what may be holding you back from achieving your highest destiny in this lifetime, then this reading is for you. As I've said before, if you feel stuck or frustrated or otherwise stymied in areas of major interest to you, could be your relationships, could be your career, could be your finances, a lot of times those two are related to, or any other areas of concern, and you'd like to know why, then again, this reading is for you. If you would like to understand how you have been conditioned through early life patterns of behavior, psychological patterns of behavior that reflect your experiences from probably both early in this lifetime and past life karma, and how now you're letting your unconscious script, which again is based on old soul conditioned behaviors from the past. And by this I mean, why do I always? How come he always? How come she? How come I never? Okay, when you ask yourself those questions, this is what I'm talking about. Astrology is not fated. That is a traditional concept when astrologers of yore believed, and some did, of course, that they could predict the future. Modern astrology, especially the kind that I practice, which is archetypal, which comes out of our mythology, psychological, which is interpreted through the patterns that the planets and the signs in which they inhabit and the houses they are in and the aspects they make to our other planets in our individual birth charts, which are determined by not only the date of birth, but the time, exact time, and the location, which is determined by the longitude and latitude of the location of your birth. So it's a very specific personal thing. And yes, some people have similar charts and all of that. We have astro twins and there's literal twins. But it's not about the fact that you might have the same placements or aspects in your chart. It's more a matter of how you perceive the energies that these aspects projected to you, and how you then chose to go forward by manifesting them. And there is an archetypal range that means that one person with the same aspect, even in the same signs in the same houses, but combined with differences in other parts of their charts, may have acted completely differently through their own individual perceptions. And, a simple example of that is if you have siblings or even fellow students, say, right? Siblings may view their parents differently. One may see their mother in one light while the other sees her in another. Students in the same class may have completely different attitudes, opinions, and perspectives about their teacher. So I think that's a very simple way to kind of explain why it's important to get your natal chart done, because it carries very specific messages in addition to what I also practice, which is evolutionary astrology, which looks at the energies into which your soul decided to be born into this lifetime. You may believe in past life karma or you may not. Doesn't really matter, because the energies would, if you don't believe in past life karma or reincarnation, the energies would have manifested upon your incarnation, even if you believe there's only one such thing and it lasts one lifetime and then it's done. But it will reflect in your chart. So anyone who's interested in any of that and who wants to become more conscious about how to not perceive and then act on or ignore and thus manifest energies in a particular way because they have not brought true happiness, or what we would consider success. To me means true happiness. A success can have a million different definitions, right, for each individual person. But the end result is success. It means what makes you happy. So again, as I like to say, conscious awareness has never been so easy or so affordable when you take advantage of my special discounted 75-minute Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for only $125, which you can find at karmicevolution.com/karmic125. And again, if you have any questions about this reading, feel free to email me at SHERI, SHERI, at karmicevolution.com, and I'll be happy to get back to you. All right, so let's now get into this week's astro news you can use. I'd like to start out with a recap from the beginning of this past week, or May 20th, when the Sun moved into Gemini, and then trined Pluto retrograde in Aquarius on May 22nd, which I think proves super interesting when we become apprised of astrologer Rob Hand's general interpretation of this aspect in his Planets in Transit book, which notes, and I quote, "This transit signifies that you need very intense and powerful experiences today so that you can learn everything possible about the inner working of the world in general and your life in particular. This is an excellent transit for taking up any kind of investigation or study." And I go, yay, because my son just graduated from Georgetown Law School on Sunday, and he's going to be studying for his bar exam. So I'm like, okay, dude, go for it. Sun trine Pluto. Anyway, it's about now that he should be starting to set himself down. Now he's had a few days of partying. So those of you with kids, you get where I'm coming from, right? Anyway, Rob Hand continues, "Look within yourself to determine what motivates you, what you are seeking in life, and what changes you should make so that your life will run more smoothly. Decide what parts of your life should be reformed, and then reform them." Now, he makes it sound easy, right? But Hand adds and concludes, noting, quote, "The transformative energies in your life now allow you to make changes rather easily and to derive great satisfaction from making them." And that's because it's a trine, which is a 120-degree angle between planets. And these are known as, it's known as one of the Ptolemaic easy aspects. And since Pluto's in Aquarius, now, it's in Aquarius until October or September 1st, I think it is, when he retrogrades, and he goes back into, I've noted the dates before, I don't have them in front of me right now, goes back into late Capricorn in October and stations direct again. So, and then he enters Aquarius on November 20th. It's either the 19th or 20th for the long term, which is another 19 years. I've spoken about that frequently, so if you want to know more, just tune in to one of the past podcasts that talks about Pluto. But because Pluto's in Aquarius, and he's only going to spend a very short time again retrograded back into Pluto, we know that the time is right for transformation and that it is upon us now, right? So we can only assume that former presidential GOP contender Nikki Haley does not really understand the message of either the recent Sun's trine to Pluto, or she's not cognizant at all intuitively of the May 23rd Sagittarius Full Moon's message, which happened yesterday, and I'll get into in a moment, and presumably both, because CBS News reported this on May 22nd, which again is the day that the Sun trined Pluto. And I quote, Nikki Haley says she'll vote for Trump despite previously saying he's not qualified to be president. Former presidential candidate Nikki Haley said Wednesday she will vote for presumptive Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump, even though she has previously called him, quote, not qualified to lead the nation. Haley, in her first political public appearance since suspending her campaign, announced she will be voting for Trump despite all of her intense and extensive criticism of the indicted former president's actions and character. Haley, a former South Carolina governor, served as U.S. ambassador to the United Nations in the Trump administration, and since the beginning of the year, Haley has called Trump, quote, as unhinged and, quote, more unhinged than he ever was. And during a February rally, and I'm still quoting from the news piece, Haley called Trump not qualified to be president of the United States after he blasted Haley's deployed husband. I will be voting for Trump, Haley said during Wednesday's event at the HASAN Institute in Washington, D.C. Having said that, I stand by what I said in my suspension speech. In her speech, suspending her campaign back in March, Haley said she has always supported the GOP nominee, but quoted former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, who said, never just follow the crowd, always make up your own mind. Now, I'm going to say a little more about that, but it just occurs to me now that I'm going to get into the Sagittarius Full Moon's opposition to Gemini, which is highlighting its shadow side. And one of the shadow sides, which I don't actually mention in what I've, in my written remarks, is that Gemini can often be perceived in the negative light as being fickle or being two-faced, right? So here we have Nikki Haley, who said all these negative things about Trump, and now she's like, well, I lost, so I'll endorse him because, I just always make up my mind. I never follow the crowd. So Sun Pluto, the trine we just had, is about personal empowerment through reforming ourselves, which is what Rob Hand so aptly notes, right? So it looks to me like Haley's about personal empowerment, all right, but of the Reagan-esque Margaret Thatcher kind, that's already proven itself outdated with an elective that favored her initially because she stood apart from Trump, rather than deciding to do the opposite of what she advised here, which is to not follow the crowd. So it looks like Haley's enlightenment journey still has a long way to go. And I'm not looking at her chart, and I don't remember. I know she has I believe she has an Aries moon, but I think she might have taken the eclipse on the April 8th solar eclipse to her moon or close to her moon, but I'm not positive about that, so don't quote me on it. But anyway, can you say fickle? And my point is, when I said it's about personal empowerment, all right, she's just wanting to be on the right side of the political fence, which may well turn out to be the wrong side, but she's just too unenlightened to see that. But also on May 22nd, just before the Sagittarius full moon occurred, the New York Times revealed in an article that Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito had not only displayed an upside-down American flag at his home, but also another insurrectionist flag at another of his homes in New Jersey, following January 6th, 2021, the January 6th Capitol riot. And according to MSNBC's Nicole Wallace, in 2023, photos and neighbor interviews show, and this was, she was quoting a New York Times article that was printed on May 22nd. These interviews and photos show the Appeal to Heaven flag displayed by January 6 rioters was flown at Alito's vacation home in New Jersey. And it was noted on her show that the upside-down American flag dates back to the Civil War and is now a symbol of support for Donald J. Trump and was carried on January 6 by Capitol rioters as a symbol of America having gone astray and anti-government sentiment. Now, somebody noted, and historians have noted, that the upside-down American flag was also carried as a sign of, an emergency, like militarily, right? If you're in danger, you fly the flag upside down because you need help. So ostensibly, they're saying the United States government needs help, right? But the Appeal to Heaven flag, also carried by those present that day, reflects a strong strain of Christian nationalism and was visible both outside and inside the Capitol, carried by some of those who fought with police officers on that day. Until about a decade ago, this flag was basically an historical relic, said one of the guests on Nicole Wallace's show. But on January 6th, the Appeal to Heaven flag was prominent. And finally, or at least in addition, there's always so much news that to cover it all, I try to pick the things that relate most closely to the astrological symbolism of the time. But again, the New York Times ran this headline and story on May 22nd. Spain, Norway, and Ireland recognize a Palestinian state, a blow to Israel. The European nations, the Times reported, joined scores of others that recognize Palestinian statehood, adding to Israel's isolation over the war. Spain, Norway, and Ireland said on Wednesday that they would recognize an independent Palestinian state, a rebuke to Israel that, though largely symbolic, reflected dwindling international patience with its military offensive in Gaza and its decades of occupation of Palestinian territories. Scores of countries have recognized Palestinian statehood, but the closely coordinated announcements by the three nations carried added weight amid the growing toll of the war in Gaza, and because most Western European allies and the United States have resisted taking such a step out of solidarity with Israel, end quote. So I want to mention also, too, that leading up to this time, we also had the announcement of the reported in the Associated Press of the request for arrest warrants for Israeli and Hamas leaders. So they ran this headline, War Crimes Prosecutor Seeks Arrest of Israeli and Hamas Leaders, including Netanyahu. And the article starts out saying the chief prosecutor of the world's top war crimes court sought arrest warrants Monday. So this was leading up to this was during the waning third quarter square of the last monthly lunar cycle. So the arrest warrants for leaders of Israel and Hamas, including Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, over actions taken during their 7-month war. While Netanyahu and his defense minister Yoav Gallant do not face imminent arrest, the announcement by the International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor was a symbolic blow that deepened Israel's isolation over the war in Gaza. The court's prosecutor, Karim Khan, accused Netanyahu, Gallant, and 3 Hamas leaders, Yeha Sinwar, Mohammed Daif, and Ismail Haniyeh, of war crimes and crimes against humanity in the Gaza Strip and Israel. Netanyahu and other Israeli leaders condemned the move as disgraceful and anti-Semitic, and U.S. President Joe Biden also lambasted the prosecutor and supported Israel's right to defend itself against Hamas. Now, a panel of 3 judges is going to decide whether to issue the arrest warrants and allow the case to proceed. And judges there typically take about 2 months to make such decisions. Meanwhile, Israel is not a member of the court, neither is the U.S., So even if the arrest warrants are issued, Netanyahu and Gallant do not face any immediate risk of prosecution. But the threat of arrest could make it difficult for the Israeli leaders to travel abroad. So in other words, members of the ICC, member countries, have an obligation, if these arrest warrants are actually approved, to arrest the people named if they set foot in that country. So that is an interesting thing also as we work, as we now look at the Sagittarius full moon as the culmination of the Taurus new moon from May 7th. So the Sagittarius full moon occurred yesterday, May 23rd, at 2 degrees and 55 minutes of the Sagittarius-Gemini polarity at 6:53 a.m. Pacific time and 9:53 a.m. Eastern time. And the fact that the Sun moved into Gemini earlier this week, as already noted on May 20th, then trined Pluto in Aquarius May 22nd, and that Mercury then moved into Gemini. Oops, I'm sorry, that's not Mercury. Venus moved into Gemini just following that new moon yesterday after late afternoon. And Jupiter in Taurus sextiled Neptune in Pisces. So the first thing I want to note is that, given everything I've just discussed, we can see there's a lot of Gemini energy in the sky, or there was and there still is, at and post the Sagittarius full moon, right? So if we follow the principle that all full moons are oppositions, that's the aspect that they make, and therefore they're representative of our relationships to these particular zodiacal archetypes at play as they roll through the zodiac, right? Every time you have a new moon, the sun and the moon, the two luminaries come together in the same sign. And at every full moon, they oppose each other, depending on what month it is and which signs are at play. So the moon is always in the opposite zodiacal sign of the sun at a full moon. And oppositions, especially in psychological astrology, are always known as aspects of relationship. That's because they form a 180-degree angle, which is the circumference of the circle. And if you stand in one place and look 180 degrees ahead, you can see what's in front of you, assuming you're not in the middle of the forest, right? So you have a clear view. And in relationships, again, in psychological astrology, they usually reflect back to us the parts of ourselves that are hidden from ourselves, which is known in the terminology psychologically as our shadow side. So again, if we follow the principle that all full moons are oppositions and therefore representative of our relationships to the signs, right, that are in polarity, we can choose to understand that the Sagittarius full moon is calling us to widen our understanding beyond our local terrain and to recognize and acknowledge there's a wider world outside of our own neighborhood. So Jupiter ruled Sagittarius is the sign of the philosopher and therefore emphasizes the need for us all to recognize certain things. But first let's look at what the Gemini Sun represents, because yesterday's May 23rd Sagittarius full moon reflected the light of the Gemini Sun back onto itself, illuminating the shadow side of the Gemini archetype. And Mercury's Gemini and its association with the third house in the natural chart, right? The natural chart starts with Aries on the ascendant, so Mars rules the first house. And when we get to the third house, Mercury's Gemini rules the third house. Taurus rules the second, and so on. So it just follows the zodiac all around the 12 houses. However, the third house represents not only communication and siblings, but youth in general, elementary learning, the local neighborhood, local business, read commerce, and local transportation. It also relates to near relatives other than siblings, such as cousins, aunts, and uncles. And according to evolutionary astrologer Stephen Forrest in his book, The Inner Sky, in general, Mercury represents and here I quote, intelligence, transmission of information, and I said read communication again, talking, teaching, writing, and the reception of information. For example, listening, learning, reading, observing. So while Mercury-ruled Gemini is known for being mentally agile, quick thinking, curious, chatty, loquacious, and social, it does, like all zodiacal archetypes, carry a darker side. And since all full moons, like I said already, reflect the light of the sun back onto itself to reveal the not-so-wonderful side of its archetypal range of energies, this darker side of Mercury, according to Forrest, can include nervousness, rationalization, worry, flightiness, intellectualism. And here I believe he means what might be better known as pseudo-intellectualism. And he goes on, chattering, inconsistency, and hyperactivity. It's a mutable sign. In addition, when speaking specifically about Mercury-ruled Gemini, Forrest writes in his book Yesterday's Sky about the less conscious side of the Geminian archetype when it's the ruler of the karmic south node, which needs to come into greater consciousness precisely so we can leave behind the negative traits of this archetypal energy, because that's what our soul incarnated to do. However, the Gemini archetype's shadow side can exist not only as part of the natal nodal axis, but anywhere it finds itself in the charts. So, that's because all planetary and zodiacal archetypes present us with the possibility for an evolution in consciousness so that we can jettison the negative manifestations of these energies in order to move toward its polar opposite, which in this case is Jupiter-ruled Sagittarius. And this means that the Gemini archetype, as Stephen Forrest puts it, needs to, and again I quote, guard against a state of chronic overextension and become aware of a pattern of having plenty of effective tactics, but no overarching purpose or strategy. So immediately we can see how Jupiter-ruled Sagittarius, the archetypal sign of higher consciousness, represents the path Geminis are meant to follow, especially when Forrest adds that Gemini carries with it, quote, relentless pressures toward chatter and running around in circles. And after reading that years ago, I always get the visual image of a dog chasing his tail when I think of the darker side of mutable Gemini energy. And, that also includes what Forrest describes as chatter, because I've noticed that the lowest form of Geminian expression can be gossip. I mean, in today's day and age, it's also conspiracy theories. But it's also talking on and on about superficial things, like where one got one's nails done or what's the weather going to be tomorrow. And though the answers to those kinds of questions are not necessarily uninteresting to the one who's asking them, Gemini archetypal energy can nevertheless get caught up in the details without fully understanding the bigger picture. Like, say, if a Virgo-oriented person, which is also Mercury-ruled, right? But Virgo is more about analyzing the details to reach a conclusion. You might ask, how often your friend gets her nails done and how much money she spends on it. Then you'd perhaps calculate how much her mani-pedis cost over the course of a year, stuff like that. Gemini's not interested in that. So, something that I think might help clarify this archetypal polarity, and which also combines what I said before about mixing the Gemini archetype with the archetypal interpretation of the natural third house in anyone's chart, is something that comes from renowned astrologer Dane Rudhyar's book, The Astrological Houses, which was published way back in 1972. I've read this before, or I've mentioned this before on my show, but, probably long ago, so I don't know that everybody remembers it or that we have new people who never heard it. But although Rudhyar is speaking of third house energy in evolutionary astrology, we look at houses not only as places where action or events occur, but we can synthesize the archetypal meaning of them. That's what I just mentioned, based on both their natural and natal rulers, meaning in your specific natal chart, to discern greater understanding of the overall meaning of the chart. And to that end, Rudhyar was particularly prescient, in my opinion, when describing the more generic meaning of this house, when he wrote, again, way back in 1972, that, quote, third house knowledge should be transformed into fourth house power. And fourth house is ruled by the moon, naturally. It is possible, he says, to stop looking for more knowledge too soon, so that personal integration and power to perform individual acts may be too narrow and ordinary. Makes me think a little bit of Nikki Haley. How about you? He says, so I'm saying, can you see how he's saying, gosh, maybe there's more out there than you can see from your own kitchen window or your own back door, and how this can relate to finding our way toward recognizing a larger, more expansive view or pattern of the world as a whole. And Rudyard continues, and I quote again, it is also possible to keep on acquiring data which cannot be constructively and significantly integrated into one's system of living and world view. Again, we have, world view is Sagittarius, the opposite. And this can lead to various types of catastrophes, Rudyard says. Again, quoting him, our whole Western society is following this latter course and may reach a stage at which it will suffocate in a mass of unassimilable, I know I read this before because I also stumbled over the same word, unassimilable data, that's as good as it's going to get, and the neurotic compulsion to have and to know more and more of what it can no longer integrate within a wholesome and harmonious philosophy of being. Again, that's Jupiter Sagittarius's role, to be able to incorporate a whole and harmonious philosophy of being. Like, what is my life about? What is the bigger picture? So if you ask me, Rudyard was predicting the internet and social media. And while I'm assuming he did not necessarily know how it would happen in the future, he intuitively understood that we were headed in that direction. And basically he's saying too much information, and I'd add too much information coming at us from too many different sources, something the internet bombards us with in modern times, causes confusion rather than clarity. And because of that, we become less and less able to integrate the small, local picture of our lives into the bigger meaning of it. In other words, confusion causes us to kind of stop in our tracks and become confused about what has greater meaning and what is merely superficial BS. So Jupiter ruled Sagittarius, the sign of the full moon, is the sign of the philosopher, and therefore emphasizes the need for us all, and here I quote Stephen Forrest again from yesterday's Sky, quote, to think deeply and intuitively about what is truly important in life, using, quote, values, beliefs, and personal philosophies as our guide. Now, that's pretty much tantamount to what I just said Rob Hand interprets Sun trine Pluto as, and particularly since we're talking about the Sun in Gemini right now, just that aspect perfected just before the Sagittarius full moon opposing the Gemini Sun. So we're being asked to jettison any attachment we have at this lunation to only our own perspective or our own opinions that don't include the kind of adventurous, all-inclusive attitude Sagittarius traditionally represents archetypally, including that related to the excitement of foreign travel, higher education, law, and religion. In that light, we're being asked this month to release any narrow-minded or superficial prejudices that stem from only a local analysis. Read, well, that doesn't happen here, or why should I care about some other place or their people? In addition, Sagittarius represents law, because I said it's higher law as it relates to the courts. But it doesn't represent the government per se, rather only one part of it. At least here in the U.S., it's the Uranus-ruled 11th house that represents the legislative body that makes, or read codifies, the laws and the courts. Read Jupiter's 9th house, Jupiter-ruled 9th house, naturally, that carry them out. So it's Uranus's rulership of the 11th house that includes the group of legislators who make the laws that Jupiter's 9th house enacts. Okay? Though the function of upholding the law falls to Saturn's 10th house domain, it's still Jupiter's Sagittarius and the 9th house that explores the limits of judicial philosophy as lawmakers attempt to decide what's morally and or ethically wrong or right when it comes to the setting and breaking of the laws. While all three represent governmental institutions, Saturn represents the judges or the juries who impose the actual penalty for breaking the laws conceived of by Jupiter's 9th house and Sagittarius and codified by the Uranian 11th house group of lawmakers, at least in a democracy such as the United States. So it's easy to see at this recent Sagittarius full moon how these kinds of issues have been plaguing not only the U.S., but other nations across the globe as well. And that includes things which I've mentioned many times before in relationship to Sagittarius, Jupiter Sagittarius, which is immigration, which is related to foreign travel, religion and law. I mean, I just said these things, right? And higher education. And that includes the enforcing or restricting of laws having to do with crossing borders between nations. So we need only look again at the ongoing territorial disputes between Israel and Hamas as one of the prime examples right now over disagreements over the rulership of Gaza and its borders as the Israeli war against Hamas and Gazan inhabitants continues. This is not the only dispute, as I said, of that kind in the world, simply the one upon which all eyes have been focused since October 7th, which was also close to last fall's set of eclipses on October 14th and 28th. So letting go of perspectives and opinions that are based on superficial or conspiracy theory-oriented things that don't have any basis in fact is again a theme at this lunation. We've mentioned before many times that this theme has arisen based on even different zodiacal aspects, right, and energies. But it seems so prevalent, particularly ones that involve Pisces and Virgo, because Pisces is the planet ruled by Neptune, the planet of illusion, confusion, and delusion, which I've mentioned many times before. And Sagittarius on its own, of course, can be exaggerative. But here, as the moon opposing the sun, pointing out its shadow side, it's showing it a higher road. When we have a Gemini full moon, reflecting the light of the Sag's sun back to itself, then we see the Sag shadow side of hubris, arrogance, and exaggeration, right? But now that's not the case. So what's interesting to note now is that at this May 23rd Sagittarius full moon yesterday, we also experienced a Venus-Jupiter conjunction in Taurus. Venus is sextile to Neptune in Pisces. And right after that, Venus's entrance into Gemini, which I said before, although I mistakenly first said Mercury's entrance into Gemini. And that happened also while Jupiter in Taurus was forming also a sextile to Neptune in Pisces. Now that's an awful lot, when we combine it all, of optimism and wishful thinking in this combination of energies, at least in my opinion. And illustrative again of, someone like Nikki Haley optimistically thinking that she's going to be like, I hate Trump. Trump is not fit for office. He's deranged. He's unhinged. He's crazy. Now, she didn't say all those things. I'm just sort of mimicking Trump when he says them about other people. But she did say unhinged, right? Because I quoted from the news piece. But in any case, she's denigrated him and says he's not fit to be president. And now she's like, oh, well, I'll just back him. I'm a Republican. And you know what Margaret Thatcher said, which makes completely zero sense to me. But anyway, and again, that it's also holding on to past opinions, past perspectives, which go all the way back to the 1980s when Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan were in power, and that their theories, and especially in America, Reagan's attempts to deregulate have led us now to the decimation of the administrative state by the Supreme Court, which is a whole nother story that I won't get into right now. And some of you who are lawyers, I'm sure, know what I'm talking about, and others of you who are well-read. But the whole point is that it ain't like that anymore, Nikki. You got to get with the program, okay? As we say where I come from. Anyway, I think that, again, those energies yesterday, which may be lingering today, are still just a very optimistic and very wishful thinking. And, by the time Venus trines Pluto, she'll be trining from Gemini to Aquarius, Pluto retrograde, we may be headed for a good deal of intensity within our relationships by May 25th when that occurs. And this may also be exacerbated, as I've been watching, when Mars conjoins Hygeia, which is the goddess asteroid of health. Hygeia, again, to remind you, is the daughter of Asclepios, who is known as the Greeks' father of modern medicine. And they built temples to Hygeia, which were filled with snakes, which were considered, healing energies. But in any case, Mars will conjoin Hygeia exact at 19 degrees and 15 minutes of Aries. And when it does, it will move on. That is May 25th. It will move on the 26th to 19 degrees 24 Aries, which is the April 8th Aries new moon solar eclipse degree. So in other words, Mars and Hygeia will be sensitizing that degree of the solar eclipse. And given that Mars will then move on to conjoin Chiron, wounded healer Chiron, at 22 degrees and 9 minutes of Aries on May 29th, and that then Mercury will conjoin Uranus in Taurus just after the third quarter waning lunar square of the Pisces moon to the Gemini Sun on May 30th, not to mention that the dwarf planet Ceres in Capricorn and wounded healer Chiron in Aries have been forming a mutable square in the sky, a cardinal square in the sky all this time. The degree of suffering that then emerges into the collective may not be easily ignored by then. And yes, I'm talking about things like the famine in Gaza, the decimation of their universities. All these things can be related. Ceres, dwarf planet Ceres, which I have mentioned before, is Demeter in Greek, Ceres in Roman, represents sustenance. Sustenance comes in two forms: food, literal food, and water, which sustain the body, sustain life, and how those translate into the ability to have faith. I have said this before a number of times. When our bellies are full, it's easy for us to have faith that we will be well fed the next day too. This is not what's happening. Ceres is in Capricorn, which is a rather harsh energy because it represents the restriction of nurturing and sustenance through food in some place like Gaza, which, again, we are mentioning the activation of the April 8th Aries new moon solar eclipse, which had both luminaries in Aries conjoined tightly to wounded healer Chiron. So the suffering, which is being caused by deprivation of literal sustenance, meaning food, and also metaphorical or figurative sustenance in the inability to govern themselves. Okay, I'm not saying what's right, and I'm not saying what's wrong. I'm just sharing the astrological energies here. So what I would like to do now, before I move on to discussing, before the end of the podcast, Jupiter's ingress into Gemini on on May 25th as well, is just to finish out the week by saying that on May 30th, late on May 30th, following the third quarter waning monthly square of, as I said, the Pisces moon to the, what did I say? Pisces moon. See, I lose my place. I get confused. I get easily confused. Oh, I can't find it now. Where did it go? Hang on. Oh, sorry. Okay, it was highlighted, but in the light color. I couldn't see it. Yeah, on the 30th, as I said before, the Pisces moon will square the sun in Gemini, okay? That's already a recipe for misunderstanding and conspiracy theories and all this kind of stuff that, people are saying things that can't really be proven, okay? And on a little later that evening and early the next day, depending on your time zone, Mercury and Uranus will conjoin in Taurus. And so that can... what I'm thinking, and I didn't go into it in this podcast, I'm sure that people who are interested have been following the news about the Donald Trump trial in New York by the DA there, Alvin Bragg. Last week I couldn't think of his name. Anyway, we may well have a verdict. Next Tuesday, we will be seeing the jury start to... I think they're going to make summations next Tuesday, the 28th, and then the jury will start deliberating. So whether or not that deliberation will conclude sooner rather than later is unknown. But keep your eye on the waxing energy up to that point, because, we may hear some surprises, okay? To me, that's a surprise announcement. So we'll take a look at that next week and see what happened and review it. But, it's going to be more likely a change in values because they're in Taurus, okay? And we know that Uranus has been in Taurus since the spring, April 17th of 2018. So let's see what happens with that. But let's look now at what I wanted to share with you about Jupiter's entering Gemini on May 25th, which is which is tomorrow. I wanted to read to you a short piece. I've read to you by him before. I think he's an excellent astrologer, a guy named Robert Wilkinson. And he published on Facebook a piece titled, "A World of New Ideas and Discovery Awaits Us." And I quote from his piece, "This year and last have been a long, steady run of Jupiter in Taurus. Last year it taught us that the old answers and old approaches won't work in our new conditions. So Jupiter enters Aries at 4:15 p.m. Pacific time and 7:15 p.m. Eastern time on May 25th, and then blasts through Gemini on its way to its retrograde station on October 9th. So he'll be in Gemini between May 25th and October 9th before he retrogrades back in Gemini at 21 degrees and 20 minutes. After which it will go back to 11 degrees and 16 minutes of Gemini between October 9th and its station direct on February 5th of next year, 2025. So it's interesting to note that, Gemini is going to be retrograde during the U.S. presidential election. We had that situation, I think, in 2020, was it? I'll have to look it up and let you know next week. Mercury stationed the day of the election. I don't think it was 2016. I think it was 2020. It could have been 2022, the midterm elections. But anyway, so the Gemini themes will dominate, Robert Wilkins says, from early October through early May 2025, when Jupiter moves out of its shadow zone and quickly transits the last 8 degrees of Gemini until it enters Cancer on June 9th. So we basically have from May 25th, 2024 till June 9th, 2025, Jupiter in Gemini. And he goes on to say, and since mid-May 2023, we've all been on some sort of pioneering adventure where we have Taurus in our charts because of the past year of the Jupiter in Taurus. While Jupiter in Aries, before that, the year before, initiated many things, Jupiter in Taurus has secured and stabilized what we needed to sustain the initiative. Now we stand on the threshold of a year of discoveries that we have what we need now to move forward. So Jupiter, and he continues, expands and opens new possibilities. In Taurus, Jupiter allowed us to expand our stability, resources, values, and any other material or non-material resources, which will keep it simple, steady, and enjoyable in the future. In Gemini, we'll have opportunities to expand our understanding, our knowledge, and our ability to communicate the ideas which turn us on and expand our ability to interact with our world. So Jupiter in Taurus brought us relative security, while Jupiter in Gemini will bring us an infinity of new views, new interpretations, new connections, and new ideas. Jupiter in Gemini is an adventure of discovery in the realm of ideas. Those who embrace this energy will find a quick, diverse growth of the imagination and ability to connect many idea dots, which will make for some diverse and interesting discoveries in the realm of mind and perception. However, Jupiter in Gemini will also lead some who are stuck in non-productive inertia to begin searching for A, justifications to stay stuck in that inertia, and or B, ideas which distract rather than inform, superficialities rather than depth perception. These people will see opportunity in being dilettantes or moving in one direction and then another, sampling everything and finishing nothing. End quote. So this is very much akin to what I was saying, because the negative potential of Jupiter in Gemini, and I love to look at the shadow side. It's easy when things are going in a productive fashion, right? It's easy when we're like, oh, Gemini, it's great. I made more friends, and I bought a home in my in the neighborhood I wanted to move to, or oh, I just love my neighbors. They're so wonderful. Or my sister and I have gotten together, and we haven't seen each other in 2 years. It's so great. All these wonderful Geminian things, right? Or I'm taking a course. I'm starting to study something. This is all wonderful. But the negative side is just what we've said before, not to beat a dead horse, which is, it's our perspectives and our opinions. And I think he's saying that if we don't move adequately into Jupiter and Gemini, we may stay stuck in the inertia of Jupiter and Taurus. And that's number one, old values, right? So even if the last year we've expanded our set of values to be more in alignment with current events and current life, we may still stay stuck with them as things continue to change if our perceptions do not change. And our perceptions will change when we go out and converse with others, when we listen, as Stephen Forrest said, when we're not constantly chasing our own tail or being hyperactive or being too chatty, right? Too superficial in what we talk about, too gossipy, too conspiracy theory-ish, and all that stuff. So we're looking at a time when Jupiter and Gemini on the negative side can potentially increase or expand all of that stuff. I was reading yesterday an article about Christina Bobb, who is one of Trump's election deniers, and his current lawyer, who's got a role now in the RNC as the ethics lawyer, but she was just brought up in charges in Arizona for trying to, for election fraud by claiming the election was rigged and all that stuff. Well, she actually wrote a book, and in the book is all this BS. Right? So Jupiter and Gemini, yeah, you might write a book, but you better check your facts, because you don't want to get sued or whatever. Or, you could be dedicated, of course, to a conspiracy theory or a belief in a conspiracy theory, but we may well see more of that kind of stuff. And that may also relate to the court, which, as I understand today, since I mentioned Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito, and, a little bit about these flags, but also that some of the Democrats in Congress are calling now for him to recuse himself, and also for Clarence Thomas, whose wife, Ginny Thomas, was definitely pro-insurrection on January 6th, who texted, and there's a nice Gemini thing, texted numerous times, Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, about all the horrible things that were happening if we didn't overturn the electoral votes. and essentially was, pro-insurrection, right? So a lot of this stuff is going to get amplified, and that makes it more important for us to understand where we stand. Now, the Sun trine Pluto that I mentioned earlier in the podcast is a fleeting energy, right? It sounds pretty intense, and Venus is also going to go on to, Jupiter will go on to trine Pluto on June 2nd. Venus will also trine Pluto, and that's going to happen tomorrow, right? So we've got just this lot of intensity related around Plutonic themes of getting to know ourselves better, getting to know the meaning of our own individual lives, the bigger meaning, the bigger picture, as well as the bigger picture of the collective, of what's going on in the collective. I'm going to assume that if you listen to this podcast, you're interested in such things, because I don't think you would make it very far if you're not. So anyway, as you know, I'm all about soul growth and karmic evolution, both personally, but we can see what path to follow by paying attention to current events and watching what's happening there. And then we can filter it down to the as above, so below edict, which says that what's going on up in the heavens and the sky is reflected back to us through the collective, through the group, through a wider movement. And then we can extrapolate whatever has meaning out of that into our own personal lives. So it's important to pay attention to all this stuff. So, thank you, everyone, for joining me again today. I hope you found the information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. I do hope to have more news about the Trump trial next week. It was just a bit too overwhelming to look at making any kind of forecast here, because Trump has, as many of us know, a very fortunate configuration of energies in his chart. If he does not get convicted by the jury, I wouldn't be shocked. But on the other hand, I've listened to both, again, Geminian kind of arguments, some saying that he's definitely got to be found guilty, and others saying that it's hinges on a very flimsy kind of prosecution, under New York law, that the jury may not consider as important as the prosecutors and the DA who brought the case does. So in any case, let's see what happens, because I'm honestly not going to be surprised either way. I know what I hope, but I will not be surprised. So let's see. But I do think keep your eye on that Mercury-Uranus conjunction, which is next Thursday. So probably when I'll be recording this. It takes place late on Thursday night, May 30th, and early on the 31st, as I noted. In any case, be sure then to join me on May 31st for another episode of Karmic Evolution, Astrologically Speaking. Until then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go.